Bonjour, welcome, and bonjour to our podcast listeners. As you know, Presenting Our Presence is a podcast that amplifies the voices and the perspectives and the contribution of our Indigenous colleagues here at the University of Alberta. It's co-hosted by myself, Dr. Florence Glanfield, and Kyle Napier. And today we have the privilege and honor of a returning guest, Dr. Jessica Vandenberghe. Thanks for joining us again, Jessica. And we'll be having a conversation with our colleague, Sherri Kuss. So welcome to you both. And thank you so much for accepting the invitation to be on POP and to share about who you are and your passions and also the ways in which you contribute at the U of A. So welcome to you both. And Jessica, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself in a way that's meaningful. And also, you know, you were the one who wanted to invite Sherri. Thank you so much, because I've never met Sherri. So what a great occasion to meet our colleagues at the U of A.
Sounds good. Thanks for the kind introduction and the invitation back. This is such a great podcast that's put out by the university. I think at the heart of everything we do is always relationship and kinship. And this is just such a good way to build community and build relationship as well. So I'm Jessica Vandenberghe. I'm no doctor. I'm not a full tenured professor. I'm an assistant dean in the Faculty of Engineering. I have a bachelor's and a master's from the Faculty of Engineering. So I'm alumni from the U of A. I'm born from the Denetah First Nation to the north, but I'm a 60 Scoop survivor. So I was in the foster adoption system, born and raised in the Peace region here in Alberta, up in Treaty 8, and found my way through about a 20-year adventure of different industries and engineering jobs and leadership positions and responsibilities, and have found my way back to the faculty here to help with building community, shifting culture, making inclusive places for equity deserving demographics, but especially for our First Nations, Métis, Inuit students and staff. So we're really trying to create some change and really amplify those voices that aren't always seen. And that really led me to wanting to have a conversation here in this format with Sherri. So Sherri, I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, but works in our co-op office. We can chat a little bit about what the co-op office is. But Sherri, I've gotten to know over the last few years that I've been here, had some really great conversation about her heritage, and just wanted to really give the opportunity to amplify her and what she does and her family. So Sherri, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica and Cindy. Appreciate the invitation as well. I feel honored and blessed to be in the presence of people like yourselves and part of this community, which is in my mind one of the cornerstones of transition and change to doing some amazing things. So thank you for that. Again, my name is Sherri Kuss. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a Métis woman residing in Treaty 6 territory, born in Edmonton. My position here at the University of Alberta Faculty of Engineering is Director of Student Services, Cooperative Education, and Engineering Career Connections. So kind of three different areas. Basically, I help support and I serve students, over 4,800 undergraduate students within the Faculty of Engineering, and work with a team of wonderful people who all do the same kinds of things. So everything on the student services side is from the time they enter the university or apply to the university to the time we convocate them. One of my greatest prides pride is probably an odd word, but is sitting on the stage and watching our grads cross the stage and doing little waves and high fives and such at the end. I've been with the university since 2007 and came up through the co-op program where we basically support employers and students and their cooperative education placements throughout their degree. And then the Engineering Career Connection side is specific career development resources and opportunities for all of our students, undergrad and grad students as well. So resource development and everything from how to write a resume to how to connect with industry. So that's a little pitch for what we do. We have a pretty strong and mighty team, I think, of around 33 people. So it's a big team. And yeah, I've had the pleasure of getting to know Jessica and absolutely adore the work that she's been doing in our faculty. I think it definitely shows a commitment to where our faculty wants to go. A lot of work still to do, but I think I'm proud to be part of a faculty that is committed to trying. My personal story as a Métis person is not one that's rich in culture and tradition. In fact, it's quite blank. And there's a lot of reasons for that, dating back to my father's upbringing, and I can speak a bit more on that later. It's probably a story that's not terribly unusual for a lot of us who have grown up where, in our generation, the way I was raised and the way my father was raised, it's like we didn't really want to acknowledge our heritage, our culture, and where we've come from. But what I find a lot of joy in the stories that I've been discovering over the past 10, 15 years, that I've been able to begin a journey of what I would call emerging pride and ownership, and I hope not appropriation of anything, because as I'm learning more about, these are people in my family, these are my grandfathers and grandmothers and great grandmothers. And so I thought I would just talk a little bit about that family tree. And when I talk about family trees, sometimes then I feel guilt. And this is going to sound strange, but I feel guilt because I'm owning something that isn't my story, but it's their story. And they have some really incredible stories. So I guess I'll start with my dad. He was born in a place called Waterways, which is just south of Fort McMurray, the little community. And he was born to Joseph Auger and Catherine Lynch. And the Auger folks, my great-grandmother, Virginia Ducharme and Eli Auger, were from Lac La Biche area. And then they moved up to Fort McMurray to establish a trap line and farm and do some things for their family there. They moved up with a number of other families. There's a lot of neat stories that I've been finding around that journey, having to portage the Grand Rapids from Lac La Biche up to Fort McMurray. They got stuck in the ice for 65 days. Really some neat stories there. So they basically built a cabin where Suncor kind of now sits, Saline Lake, across from Suncor. And they had a trap line that went all the way across Suncor, where present-day Suncor is, over to Firebag. And that was an interesting story for me to learn as well. Maybe I won't say this next part, but no, I will, because it's funny. My grandfather was the only really thing I learned much about his history as an Indigenous person was he was a trapper as well as a tugboat captain, but he went on and grumbled about how the energy company tore down his hut or his cabin without his permission. So he's still chapped about that even when he was well into his 70s. So that was some of the other interesting things that I found out about our family a number of years ago is, and my grandpa used to say, yeah, we fought alongside Riel. And then my dad would say, oh, stop, right? Don't fill the kid's head with that kind of nonsense, that stuff. So it was dismissed. But I learned that my great-grandma Virginia was the daughter of Antoine Ducharme and Carolyn Fiddler, and they were from St. Francis Xavier in Manitoba, actually. So not too far from your family, Cindy. And interestingly enough, Carolyn Fiddler was the daughter of Francois Fiddler and Josephette Laplante, who was in the families of the resistance, the women of the resistance. So I went back and looked at that document you shared, Cindy, and they did they were involved alongside each other. So our great-grandmothers would be quite interested to see that we're having this conversation. And it's just really interesting to me to see this legacy of stories. And I wish I could go back in time and have some of those conversations. What was it like, really? And then prior to that, some of the other history, which is quite well documented, is from, would this be 5 times? Great-grandmother Mary Macagon, who was married to Peter Fiddler. So there's a lot of documentation and stories on there, as well as even some interesting videos, which I have really enjoyed.
Oh, it's good to hear the family lines and that you've taken the time to really trace it back and figure it out. And, you mentioned a couple of things that resonate around layers of shame and guilt. And I think that's a common thread that we hear amongst a lot of people of our generation. I know as a 60s scooper, I feel a lot of that for sure, because I didn't grow up in community, and the way the foster adoption system worked when I grew up, it was closed up until 1999. So everything was a complete cutoff. But since then, I've been reconnecting with my birth family and the home community and trying to figure things out and learn them. But lots of layers of shame, blame, and guilt in there, right? That aren't always, because it's not our fault, the things that happen, right? And our disconnect from community and culture. But I'm glad to hear that you're so excited. You can hear the passion that you have for reconnecting and learning the stories and seeing through what was shared with you and what wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I had no idea about this. So I think my grandfather was trying to tell some of the stories, and then my dad would go, oh, they're not important, right? And there were, so I don't have the classic, I guess, or traditional, some Métis types of traditions or cultural, I would say, celebrations that maybe you assume would be with Métis culture. Like we did family gatherings, absolutely, but it was a different kind. It's not what you see in some of the textbooks about Métis family gatherings now. It was just very different, right? My great grandmother Virginia, who's Ducharme, then Auger, we were born on the same day, so March 9th, and she spoke English, French, and Cree, and my dad does speak Cree, and he understands it. But I feel a little sad that it wasn't shared with me, right? So because he married a French woman, my mom, and it's almost like with I don't know if anybody else has noticed or felt like this, but sometimes with my dad, who I have an amazing relationship, by the way, because I don't want to discount this, but he would almost do things like say disparaging things about our culture or about Indigenous cultures and his Cree culture. And it was almost in my mind a bit of a defense mechanism. If I say it first, then nobody can say it about me. And he would work a little harder, or he would have to prove himself more. Like he left home very early to go to school. He wasn't in a residential school, but he left Fort McMurray at 15 to go to Mount Royal College, right? So, and it's almost like he had to work harder and prove himself more. And then that's the kind of upbringing I had. It's like, you shall work harder, you shall have the best grades in the class, you shall go to university, you shall do these things, because nobody in our family had done those things, right? So it was almost a different kind of expectation of growing up. And there were some disparaging things where, and I know, Jessica, you and I have talked about this, where I was told to maybe deny, you're not that, you're blue eyes, you're very white, right? And I run around in the summertime with bare feet and braids, and I turn brown, and I looked very, very native, right? So, and you get the comments. So all of a sudden the shoes go back on and the braids come out, and you put the sunscreen on, right? So the parts that I feel guilty about and have some shame about is, and especially as a teenager, I mean, my dad looks Cree, right? He really does. And I feel super ashamed about it now, but I was embarrassed. Oh, you look so Indian. Isn't it horrible to feel that as a child about your
family? And it was a time where like the systematic racism was very, very apparent, right? And you see it still, remnants of it, even just in office language, like off the reservation, or circle the wagons, or let's have a powwow. And that you hear remnants of it, and you hear remnants of it still in movies and television, like lots of stuff around, right? Like remember just watching a movie recently with Brad Pitt in it. I forget what the movie was called, but they said, the only good Indian is a dead Indian, right? And that was very prominent in Western movies, right? And so, it still perpetuates out. But that's why the work that we do in equity, diversity, inclusion, for reconciliation, for all of that is meant to point out the systematic racism and point out where there's things that are living in our stereotypes and unconscious bias. And, Sherri, I went through a similar thing to you growing up as well, that growing up in a German Catholic household in a community where there was very few First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. I walked away from that community with a lot of stereotypes and bias as well. And then I came to the university and I'm like, oh my gosh, none of these things are true. I need to really think about what I'm perpetuating and not. And, the university, as you know, is an international hub. So we have a lot of chances to make friends of all sorts of people from around the world, including our own Indigenous peoples as well. So a lot of unlearning that I know I had to do as part of my generation, and it sounds similar to you as well.
Yeah, and then as a child or growing up, or teens especially, like the teen years are something else, right? So growing up with different kinds of beauty standards, that if you weren't petite and blonde and small and have a certain, you're like, I got a round face, boy, I got cheekbones, and my eyes do this, and maybe I didn't smile as much. I walk around with my eyes real wide. And now I look at people like Ashley Collingbook, who are just transforming, for me, making me proud of the kind of different, beautiful standards out there, beauty standards. And that sounds really small, but it's important for my daughters. And this is the point. This is the next thing I wanted to talk about is I'm so excited about the stories that I see emerging through my daughters who are teaching me. I took the Indigenous Canada course, which was fabulous, and reading the stories and talking to some of my relatives. But what I'm seeing is my daughters are proud, and they're not appropriating it. Like I feel sometimes like I'm appropriating my own culture, which is really strange. I don't know if you know what I mean by that. Like I'm a bit of am I a settler? Like what am I? Because I'm both. But so an example where I'm just so excited to see this is emerging is my youngest daughter graduated from MacEwan, and they did a really terrific job of supporting kind of Indigenous cultural celebration in the whole thing. They had drummers, they had dancers. It was beautiful. And she and I went looking for a grad dress for convocation. We went shopping for 5 hours, and she said, no, none of it's right. And she went and she sewed a ribbon skirt. And she wore a ribbon skirt, and she was so proud of her ribbon skirt. And if technology worked better, if I find a picture, I'll show you. It's just beautiful. And then MacEwan gives a sash, like it's a certain sash that goes around, and there's a turtle on it. And they really, they did a great job of that. But my daughter also, she works for a nonprofit organization where her clientele is this high Indigenous clientele. And she meets regularly with an elder to try and make sure that she serves herself, because it's a difficult job. And she creates, the space she needs to work with people well. And she smudges daily. So these are things that I had no idea existed when I was a child or a teenager. And same thing with my older daughter. She came in through the TIP program and spent a lot of time at her First Peoples house. She took us to the first round dance at the U of A here. She is one, and through my daughters, they're kickstarting things for my dad, which making him go, hey, I'm proud of this now. And sharing more stories. So my daughters, and I think our youth of the future, like lifting up the youth, right? So intergenerational trauma is real. It's significant, but lifting these students up, lifting people up is one of my goals in my role here at the university too.
And this is so true, right? Like the elders and knowledge keepers tell us, that we walk with the past 7 generations. So they walk with us, and they pass us their bundles, and, we add things to our bundles, and we set some things down when it's time to set those things down, and we honor them and let them go. And then help with the future generations for the next 7 generations. And, when I think about that, like through those lenses, like you are your ancestors, Sherri, right? So even though you feel, sometimes like a fraud, or we talked about imposter syndrome, and we talked about these layers of shame, blame, or guilt, you also have pride in you, right? And you have this grounding from a time when oppression wasn't so active. So 7 generations ago, before, the Indian Act and everything that was done to the Métis and everything that happened in Canada, you have that with you still, and it's in there. And you see it in your kids, right? And so, when I think about my kids and things like that, because it's similar to you, like this is why, I thought you make a wonderful guest, because I think there's a lot of parallels between our stories, that like my kids as well smudge, no shame or anything. It took me like several decades to get to the point where I don't feel shame for these things. And especially having made my career in engineering, where, with the intersectionality of female and Indigenous, there was a time where I denied my identity, and a time where I tried to hide it or blend in and dismiss it. And, to speak to what you said about your father, self-deprecating humor was a tool sometimes used, or, you make fun of yourself, or just, as you said, to beat people to the punch so they don't make fun of you, so you make fun of yourself. Like all of these are things that I've seen amongst people that I've talked to over my years as they've shared their stories with me as well. And so it's nothing unusual, but we are finding our way through, and you see it in your daughters, right? And you see them and you can tell them they're so proud, and they have helped you heal, and they've helped your father heal, right? And this is such a big thing in our youth and our next generations, that they are healing things that they don't even know that they are.
And to add to that piece, so beautiful, and there's so many powerful insights in this conversation, and the thread, Sherri, that you speak of, and that I'm hearing is like this emergent, right? It's like this emergent joy. These youth, they are our leaders, right? It's like I think about your daughters, I think about my nieces, I think about all these youth that we're accompanying and who are accompanying us. They are leaders, right? They are leaders, and we're doing it collectively. And when I think about the intergenerational element of trauma, the carrying of shame and guilt, what emerges also when we go back home on that trap line of your grandfather, the stories of our family, something gets shed. There's a shedding that occurs, right? And that relearning about the complexities, the struggles, the labor of assimilation. Like I think I've learned that from going back home. It's like, wow, respecting that labor to fit in, right? And having that deep compassion. It's like, wow, you made those efforts to fit in or to deny that identity, to survive, to live well for the next generation. And I think that's the labor of the generation of our parents, that they did in their acts of love, in their acts of sovereignty, right? So that we could shed the shame, or, I've written about, let's actually talk about the shame. Let's put it on the table. And in that doing, there's a letting go almost that I see, as you're saying. It's like that is emerging to these young people. No, I am who I am. I am Métis, and that's it, Auntie. There's no question. There's no narrative of forgotten or defeated that plays out. And so, and I love the piece of that's not in the textbooks, thank goodness, because in doing so, we're interrupting these textbook narratives that says what it is to be Métis, what is Métis identity, and it can only look a certain way. No, it's like the diversity, the brilliance, the beauty, the mobility, and all its differences, right? And so that's why you're reminding me, it's like why these stories from home are so important. within our own family, at our own kitchen tables, what we bring to our students, our classrooms, and in our research. So it's interrupting these textbook knowledge that's, like you said, it's incomplete, right? There's an incompleteness. And so these are all kind of pieces that are, you've woken inside of me in this conversation and these beautiful insights. So merci for that. Merci for that.
It's really interesting, even as of June 2022, when my daughter said, I'm wearing a ribbon skirt, my first thought is like, and I am ashamed to admit it, what will my mom think, who is one of the people that said, yeah, you're French, you're not Métis. Eugénie's French. Oh, you don't have to own this, right? So my mom, full circle, came around and said, you're beautiful. And I'll just kind of show you I don't know if you'll be able to see this. Those are my two kids. So you can see it's kind of blurry in the here, but she has the sash, the blue sash that they give. It's very identifiable. She walked across that stage and she put her arm up, right? And she's like, yay, right? And then my daughter looks exactly like me. So the cheekbones and everything else. When she was in the TIP program, people would ask what band she was from. And that was the other thing though, too, Cindy, is that my kids have a little bit of imposter syndrome too, because they wonder if they're enough.
And they are, of course they are. Like all the elders always say, like one drop of a First Nations Métis in your blood, that's who you are. And you are your ancestors, right? Mm-hmm. You know, this whole thing of member status and having enough by government, whatever the government sets and says we're enough or not. It's just ludicrous, but it is ingrained in us to think, well, you know, there's a bar that you have to meet or a minimum or something, right? But the culture you choose is who you are.
But did you see how even I prefaced my introduction? I wanted to validate my existence by talking about my family tree, right? That's where the imposter syndrome is rooted, right? I had to talk about my family tree and my stories of my families because I don't feel that I have my own yet, right? And the other thing that I was lamenting is guilt, that I'm not doing enough now and currently to attend gatherings or teas or make space or make time to do some of the things that I think would be a good commitment to becoming more, right, on my journey. And I just haven't made that time. We talked about, that's the guilt thing. That's the workaholic thing going on here.
We are where we're meant to be, right?
Yes. And there's an important piece you shared earlier, Sherri, that I want to orbit back into. And certainly there's something, I think, an interesting piece in that in terms of your father, it's like, yeah, you've got to do more, work more. And that's, and I know that it's a narrative in my own thinking and in my own family system, especially when we're walking, like you said, in terms of that becoming. I think of the piece of becoming sovereign, right? What does it mean to become sovereign in relation to those who walk with us, or like our grandmothers who were together on that battlefield in 1885, who made that journey in 1882 and left what we call now Manitoba. Why? Because like, this is not you. There was racism and there was harm occurring way back then, which is why they left their homes, you know? So these are a part of the gifts and the teachings that come with us being together, right? It's like shifting and interrupting that noisiness that also lives inside of us, you know, that internalized stuff, you know. Yeah, guilt. Yeah, wow, so overrated. Wow, how much time we give it and shit, you know? It's like, okay, just, you know, there it is. There you are at the kitchen table. Hello, friend. You know.
This is such a big thing for you. This is such a big thing, like trying to find balance, right? Like, this is the biggest thing that I think on. Well, I think on a lot of the teachings that I've been blessed to hear, but the medicine wheel teachings around balance and what that means, and how to be your authentic self and true to yourself. But I know as well, like a lot of us walk with complex PTSD, intergenerational trauma. One effect of that, of course, is to keep busy, right? Like overworking, right? And I see that in myself, right? People always ask, how do you do so much, Jessica? Well, because I got my hatchet. It's in there. So it's very hard. Over the last decade, I've been working very hard on the balance and learning how to pause, learning how to ask for help, and, not pushing too far and looking for the signs to say, you know what, it's too much. And that's okay. And all of that, right? Like it's a hard thing to do and a hard thing to counter. And I think we hear that, that's what you're saying as well, Sherri, like this, coming from your father, like you got to work harder, you got to prove yourself. In engineering, it's always felt like that. I gotta run the race faster. Otherwise, you'll be targeted and you'll be pushed down. And it's not easy as a minority demographic, right? For sure. And I think that's kind of where your father seems to have been coming from too.
Well, and I wonder, and I think about this sometimes, and I've talked about this as well. Like, I want to win or lose, succeed or fail on my own merit without checking the box that says, oh, you got to your position because you checked this box. So I haven't shared until quite recently with a lot of colleagues that are surprised of what my background is in the last maybe, I want to say 8 or 9 years, right? And then even with, I would say, acquaintances, some friends, their narrative with me changed when I'm gonna call it came out as more more Métis than they realized. The way they would maybe talk about things changed too, and they would almost be hyper. I don't know if any of you have experienced this. Hyper sensitive in the way they would approach or say things to you.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, very, very diplomatic, right?
Like, yeah. It's all, you wouldn't have said that, if you, or you'd overhear a conversation and then they change the tone when they realize you're in the room.
Definitely. Like over the years, like that really resonates because I didn't check the box. I still, sometimes I do and sometimes I don't for the same reason. And just connecting it back to your daughters, like when I graduated, went across the convocation stage, at that time, First People's House gave medicine pouches. And so because my box wasn't ticked, they didn't know it was, but the elder came in, like she chased me down and then she gave me one. He's like, this is for you. This belongs with you, which was kind of funny. But yeah, definitely people's tone. Like I remember going into workplaces where, like they already knew, like even though I didn't check the box, they knew the box was checked, right? And they would open, lines with, you must be here to talk about females and Aboriginals. That's the term that was used at the time. I'm like, actually, I'm here to talk about engineering. But
talk about heat transfer today.
Exactly.
I think it's such
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, your couple, you make me think it's like so important, I think, to bring that to the table in the conversation also, because we don't really talk about that, but it's so true, Sherri. It's like what happens when that becoming visible, right? Therefore, oh my God, yes, what a great link in terms of why our ancestors chose to not become visible, chose to put on another identity, because we're living kind of in the same way, but it would have been different, same in that context, right? And I notice it with some students who bring that to the forefront in the classroom, and then they go through this kind of regret because they're then pinpointed. There's a gaze, right? It's like that white gaze towards, and then the potential harm that occurs within that, which is interesting, I think, to point out. And I'd love to have kind of more conversations amongst our colleagues and with one another in regards to that, And what happens when we become visible? Part of the tease and presenting is visible to one another, right? And then that strength that comes from within a collective, and there's the ramifications, right? But we are coming close to our time, so I want to put that really sitting with that piece, and future invite. I think it'd be interesting to have those conversations. Something wants to be interrupted in that and given a voice to within myself and my experience, for sure, especially in this era of reconciliation, right? And that visibility and what occurs. But I'll pass the last word to you, Sherri, if there's any highlight you want to end with, something you want to circle back in, something you want to share to our listeners or to students who maybe are imagining coming to Faculty of Engineering and the co-op program and being part of this greater community. But I want to first say thank you both for this really beautiful, important conversation. And such a joy to meet you, Sherri. Our grandmothers are surely having a celebration right now, knowing that we've found our way to one another. And how did we find our way to one another? To our colleague, through you, Jessica, right? This is the power of our network, this web that we come together. So hi, and merci to both of you. And Sherri, final words to you.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, Josephette Laplante is very excited to be part of the conversation in this way. I guess I want to end with saying I'm really excited about what I'm able to hopefully bring forward to the Faculty of Engineering as well, from an awareness and creating space for our team, and encouraging and supporting and making space for my colleagues and my staff to do things like attend the Workforce Forward conference, where they learn about doing the right kind of intentional things for creating recruitment initiatives and workplace environments with our employer partners. So reaching out, and we are hopefully making some differences. We have an intentional strategy to develop some documents and some resources for our employer partners. Looking at removing barriers for students, removing, to the extent that we all can personally, try and remove barriers for students financially, healthcare, academic, whatever barriers we can, with being very intentional about it. So that's something that I'm personally committing to as part of my own journey of not only being visible, but reconciliation as well, because I think I have some work to do on that side for myself too. So that's the last thing I wanted to say. I'm excited about the future, because I'd like to think, I'm optimistically thinking that there is an intentional strategy to make some positive change within the Faculty of Engineering, within the team, within my little sphere of influence that I can. So thank you for having me, Cindy and Jessica, for even thinking of me. Again, when you first approached me, I'm like, am I enough?
You are enough, and it's such an honor to have this chat with you, and just know that we see you, Sherri. We see you for all you are and all of your beauty and authenticity. So thank you for being willing to sit with us here and circle like this and sharing the way you did.
You're going to make me have tears. I cry easily too, by the way. Thank you. Did you know that very first time I've actually really was immersed or saw an Indigenous community was when I was 11 years old. And my grandpa's a tugboat captain. So I don't know what my parents were thinking. Back in the day, it was okay. I went for a week-long trip with my grandpa and all the crew of tugboat captain up the Athabasca River, and we went to Fort Chippewa. And that's the first time I was immersed in and spent a whole day and talking to, and it was such a sense of, I'm not this, but I am this, right? It was really incredible for me. And it shifted my world when I turned 11. And again, trying to reconcile, am I this or am I not this? And nobody talked about it in those terms back then, right?
And maybe, like you said, we're all of that.
Yeah. So that's another
that. Oh,
that's good.